ND filters for your DJI Pocket 2. Well, Freewell Gear actually sent me the 8-day all-day ND filter pack, as well as the 2-pack glow mist filters. Now, what can you actually do with this thing? We're going to go to some interesting locations today and test these ND filters out. We're also going to do some long exposure time lapse using some of these ND filters and see what you can do with them. So let's get started with the video. Now, these particular Freewell ND filters have 16 layers of optical multi-coated glass, and they're waterproof and lightweight, so they won't actually affect your gimbal. They just snap onto the DJI Pocket 2 using magnets, and they have a lifetime warranty, which is pretty cool. Now, in order to get the best results with these ND filters, there's actually 2 lines on the filters themselves, and when you rotate the glass until they actually line up with those 2 lines, that'll give you the max polarizing effect. And what I can see from these ND filters is they do not add any color cast to your videos, which is really very nice to know. Now, there are 3 types of ND filters that you get in this pack. The normal ND filter, which just blocks the amount of light that enters your camera sensor and reduces your shutter speed. Then you get the CPL or circular polarized lens filter, which actually just prevents sort of glare from windows and reflective bodies outside surfaces like snow or water like I'm at the moment. You also get the hybrid plus the polarized filter in this kit. So that's sort of like an ND filter combined with a polarizer that blocks a lot of the glare from the sun and makes your video on the Pocket 2 look a little bit better. So another benefit of the ND filter is actually to try and mimic the way the human eye sees real life. And that's called following the 180-degree shutter rule, which basically means you try and shoot double that of your frame rate. So if you're shooting a 24 frames per second timeline, you'd want to keep your shutter speed about 1/50. If you were doing 60 frames per second, you'd want to get 1/120. So that's why ND filters come in, because your camera can't actually block that much light. And remember, the DJI Pocket 2 has a fixed aperture, so you can't start messing with that. You need to use ND filters and your shutter speed to get correct exposure and motion blur in your videos. This is DJI Pocket 2 without an ND filter, shutter speeds 1/640, ISOs at 100. Let's apply one of these Freewell ND filters and actually see if it makes any difference. So now we've managed to get our shutter speed at 1/100. We're using the Nd8 filter from Freewell. This is also the polarizing filter. If I go into the sun, you'll see it still manages to keep 1/100 shutter speed, which is good, but not ideal because I'm shooting 24 frames per second. We can get the shutter speed down even more. Okay, now we're at 1/50 shutter speed, which is technically the cinematic way to film, I guess. We're going to go in the sunlight. The shutter speed stays 1/50, which shows you that these ND filters are doing their job, which is awesome. And I'm really happy with the image quality because there really doesn't look like there's any loss of quality. There's no vignetting, and so that's ideal. These ND filters really do give you quite a good result, and we can see we've managed to get 1/50 shutter speed, and that means we'll have a little bit of motion blur in our shot.
So the left has no motion blur and the right has an ND filter that gives us motion blur. We can do some nice videos with this effect. So this is a standard Pocket 2 with no ND filter, 1/2000 shutter speed. Let's add the first ND4, which will reduce up to 3 stops of light. When we compare these 2 images, we see that we're getting closer to the 1/120 because I was shooting 60 frames per second. If we compare an ND4 to an Nd8, the shutter speed comes down to 1/320 with the Nd8, so we're getting there. The standard filter is Nd16, and this gets us close to the 1/120. However, if we switch to the polarized Nd8, we can see the image does change a little bit. It does indeed look like we've got sunglasses on the DJI Pocket 2, an Nd8 with the polarized against the normal no ND filter on the Pocket 2.
The Nd4 filter will actually slow down your shutter speed by 2 stops. That's good for like overcast or cloudy days, not like today, which is really hot. You get the Nd8 filter, which slows down your camera by, I believe it's 3 stops. That's especially good if it's a little bit cloudy but daylight conditions. You also get the Nd16 filter, which slows down light up to 4 stops, I believe it is, which is pretty damn useful. Normal daylight conditions, 16 would be good. You also get the Nd8 filter, which restricts 3 stops of light and polarizes your lens to get rid of a lot of that glare that you get from the sun and preventing a lot of glare from windows. Then the Nd16 polarized stops 4 stops of light, good for the afternoon or late morning. Then you get the Pocket 2 32 polarized, which stops 5 stops of light. This is just crazy. You still get the 64 ND polarized, which does 6 stops of light. The previous 132 does 5 stops of light. So it's just unbelievable, and it's a good set for the money. Trust me, I would love to go for a swim right now, but if I take my shirt off, no one wants to see that. There's way too much muscle. I wish. Unbelievable.
So what about long exposure? Well, you can do long exposure on your DJI Pocket 2 without using ND filters, but these things kind of help you if you want to expose a little bit longer. Let's say your exposure compensation was at like plus 1.7. You could actually use an ND filter to bring it down closer to 0, which means your exposure would be better. But it's also good if you wanted to shoot more longer trailing time-lapse kind of stuff. Like I said, you can do this without ND filters, but it generally helps you control the lighting conditions of whatever scene you're in. Let me show you an example where we actually do some long exposure time-lapse photography. I believe we used an Nd8 for these particular shots. So in order to do long exposure photography, go into manual shooting mode when you're in pro mode. I actually use photo mode and I try and mess around with my shutter speed and make sure my exposure compensation is close to 0. I'm in ISO 800, then I move my joystick around just to get a test photo of perhaps a car moving past where I can get the tail lights and the color. This means my shutter is going to allow enough light in for 1.3 seconds, as you can see at the bottom, and then I go and check the photo and make sure it looks okay. Looks fine. Now, as a second example, I was in 1.6 shutter speed at the bottom. I took a test photo. I wasn't quite happy with the results, so we went back to manual exposure. I changed my shutter speed to 1/1.25, which would give me a little bit more of a trail on the background of this particular shot. So I was at minus 1.3, so not the best exposure compensation, but the photo looked okay, so I thought I'd try it. Now what I do is go into time-lapse, and the DJI Pocket will remember my manual settings at the bottom, and I will actually just click on the top there. I've got a 10-minute duration, an interval of every 3 seconds it'll take a photo, and then I add a custom motion. So I might push my joystick to the left and click the little blue plus. I'll push my joystick a little bit towards the right and add another blue point there, and then the last one on the right hand side and just push the plus. Then just click record in time-lapse mode and you can get some nice effects. Now you also get glow mist filters in this pack. We also have the 1/4 and the 1/8. Well, these basically control flare and soft light. They kind of give you like a pastel effect on your videos. They're supposed to bring your contrast down, soften your skin slightly, and also bring highlights down in your videos. So we filmed this entire little shoot, which was just a little quick thing with the DJI Pocket 2, and you will see that the little glow effects on the light do look quite nice. These are ideal for doing sort of Christmas light kind of things. Now, technically speaking, these glow mist filters give you an effect called halation, which is an artistic term, I guess you could say, but it's the spontaneous effect of the eyes sort of spreading color beyond the actual domain of the actual light. So that's all these things can actually do. So that's the end of this video. I hope you got some information out of it, and maybe hit the subscribe button if you want to, whatever. And if you want to pick up some of these ND filters, link will be in the description. See you again next time.